longer
No,
for
it isn't.
It's going.
All right, so Orozco, I think a lot of people haven't heard of Orozco, maybe because he doesn't have quite the same kind of philandering reputation as Diego Rivera, and or the talent. Definitely, I think Diego Rivera being married to Frida Kahlo adds a lot. You know, I'm trying to think of a celebrity couple, but I realized John Lennon and Yoko Ono is probably a similarly notorious couple for different reasons. If you weren't here last week, it was every year last week. We did Diego Rivera last week, so that was our sort of first Mexican muralist. And now we're going to revisit Mexican muralism with Orozco. And just remember, we're kind of addressing a similar period of time, but through the lens of a different artist. So we're going to see how he contributes a unique sort of flavor and everything to this whole Mexican muralist movement. And it really is unique to Diego Rivera. So Diego Rivera, if you remember, he was all about celebrating that forgotten Aztec history and kind of bringing it back to life, rediscovering it, and also I think impressing the heck out of everyone with his talent. And I think Orozco for me is interesting in a different way because he kind of struggles to find his sort of voice, his subject matter, and I think that struggle makes it work really relatable and interesting. And also he's got some other unique qualities to his character, like he's not so interested in kind of focusing on indigenous culture so much as kind of envisioning a Pan-American kind of sense of a future. So that's really the mural that we just saw was like the epic of American civilization, meaning America, like everybody, North and South, Central. So I think that's really unique for me because I really like that idea of kind of what's the, that huge barrier between Latin America and North America, that language barrier, that border is always, in the news, and it's such an interesting kind of impasse between North and South America. And of course what we're talking about is a muralist coming to the United States and bridging that impasse. So I think that his interest in Pan-Americanism and kind of figuring out how to find common ground between Latin America and North America is very interesting and very different than the approach of other muralists. So let's go ahead and take a look at his work. Now he was in Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. So unlike Diego Rivera, who was kind of in his ivory tower in Europe, looking back at Mexico, safe and protected, he benefited from that because maybe didn't get kind of all the negative side of the revolution, whereas Orozco really saw all the really horrible things that you would expect to see in a revolution that lasts 10 years from 1910 to 1920. So he had a first-hand kind of experience seeing all the stuff. And so because of that, he has a less romantic view of the world and of the revolution than someone like Diego Rivera. So here's a self-portrait by him. Any initial comments about him? Would you say, if I said this is a contemporary artist, would you say this is how contemporary artists, anything about him stand out if I said, oh, here's a contemporary artist?
His glasses.
Definitely cool chic glasses are part of being an artist, but maybe those are cool and chic enough. When I think of an artist, I think like Andy Warhol, the hair after he died, crazy looking. But so back in the 1900s, I think art was more of a profession. We did see that in the United States after World War II. The abstract expression artists all dressed kind of in suit and tie, and somewhere along the line it kind of got a little more punk and a little more zany or whatever. It's all good. And mustaches were still big back then. Facial hair, but yeah, it's interesting to just think about what artists, how they see their whole role in society. And of course, remember the Mexican muralists have this real mandate from the Mexican Revolution, which is we must paint the history of Mexico in a way that's more inclusive and also kind of tells the story of Mexico to people who can't read it in a book. So it's really something similar to the Renaissance of Europe, which was, again, reading, or you couldn't read the Bible, so you paint pictures. Well, in this case, he's talking about the mural being this sort of, the pinnacle of expression in this modern era. I think he's thinking, especially in terms of Mexico, serving your culture, serving your people, rather than commercializing your art and just, making money. And so it's probably a tricky translation here from the Spanish. It's not easy to totally translate certain words, but I think you get the idea that he's basically saying the mural is this sort of sacred public space that is really kind of intended to bring to life subjects and things that are meant for the enjoyment of everyone. So this is important to think about the mural versus like an easel, right? Or like public art versus private art, and commercializing art versus national, art that celebrates nation and all that. Of course, that's very different when we think about this for Mexico versus murals for the United States. And I think we have this, after we go through all the Mexican muralists, we'll go back and revisit the Works Progress Administration and how the United States took this sort of Mexican Renaissance and ran with it for a little while in the 1930s with FDR and others. You know, the Tampa International Airport, we have a few murals that were inspired from this era. And then, because of Diego Rivera's horrible experience with Rockefeller, I think very deliberately was like, no more muralism, because we're going to inspire some proletariat revolution. So let's do totally abstract art, and then no one's going to upset the apple cart. And I think that was very much a deliberate effort to kind of neuter or kind of depoliticize the world of art. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but we'll get back to that when we talk about Hitler and World War II, because you know it's a very interesting story how the United States arts emerged after World War II, and the Mexican influence is the one that people don't know much about, because most people think about the European immigrants escaping Hitler and bringing abstract art, and that's certainly, I think, really important. But the other side of it is, well, what about this muralist movement? Does that have, you know, someone like Norman Rockwell to me seems like more like someone who's like from the tradition of muralism, but he paints, you know, small scale pictures. So I don't think I remember seeing Norman Rockwell murals. So it's interesting that murals didn't kind of last much longer than World War II and further. And of course you still see murals, but not quite the government mandate to make murals to kind of tell the story of American history. So for a little while we do embrace muralism as a kind of, you know, in this kind of spirit. So Orozco, what's unique about Orozco? Well, here he is in the middle. They're both looking at Siqueiros, who's, we're going to look at him not next week, the following, but they're both looking at him like, what the heck is this guy talking about? They're both older than him.
Especially Jose Spitz, like,
he's like, I'm not impressed. They look like they're not impressed at all.
Yeah, you're not impressed.
really.
So he's actually pretty interesting. He has the worst name to pronounce if you're an English speaker, though. It's like a real godly.
That's my last name part.
Siqueiros. But he's definitely interesting in his own regard too. So we'll get back to him. And he's an interesting bridge into kind of the more kind of contemporary world of Chicano art and other things. People say he's the father of graffiti because he did spray paint. So more on him in a few weeks. But his mural in Los Angeles was destroyed because he, you know, upset the apple cart. So what about Orozco? Will he be equally kind of you know, I don't know if I want to say incendiary, provocative? Because they all know when they come to the United States, they're kind of, you know, I've said this before, but they're kind of aware that they're pawns in a bigger game of kind of mending fences with Mexico and the United States trying. But I think that's a very, you could be cynical about that, but you could also be like, well, everyone's communist, capitalists are putting aside our differences to stand up against Hitler. I think that's a more positive way of understanding this era. But that they're well aware that they have their communist buddies back in Mexico, and each of them has some, you know, I guess, kinship with communism to different degrees. But they're aware that if they sell out, quote unquote, they're going to get a lot of grief when they get back to Mexico from their communist buddies, which is too bad because you know, you'd like to think that communism could be a little more kind of forgiving and accepting of people, you know, but whatever. That's what happens when you become too ideological. Everything is filtered through your ideology. So, and that can be very tricky, and we'll kind of go over that as we keep talking about these Mexican murals. So, as you can see, he's obviously born in Mexico, west side of Mexico. And by the way, he lost his hand when he was a young man, nothing to do with the Mexican Revolution, but if you ever go to Latin America, you see a lot of kids playing with fireworks, very common. And so, and he lost his hand with a firework injury, so he's at only one hand. And I think that definitely adds a whole kind of layer of, you know, personal, you know, story that, and you definitely, whenever you see him drawing a hand in his work, it's definitely a very autobiographical kind of moment. And yeah, there you can see. And, you know, he's not hiding it with a, you know, prosthetic. He's not, you know, trying to hide it away. So, you know, I think it's a very interesting part of his own personal story. And of course, I think it adds a little bit of difficulty to painting a mural because it's such a big endeavor. So good for him for, you know, overcoming. And, you know, paintings like this of, you know, hand, I think are all the more kind of meaningful in his case. So like Diego Rivera, he was hugely influenced by Posada, who, like I said last week, was a major cartoonist of, you know, day-to-day life in Mexico during the revolution and after, and the skeleton became this kind of common denominator connecting everyone. I think you said last week, it's like underneath all the superficial differences of, you know, skin color and race and religion, the skeleton is a unifying kind of connecting thing that connects everybody in Mexico together. In the United States, do we have something like that? Not really. I mean, you could find some equivalent maybe, but certainly a skeleton is a very powerful kind of way of getting rid of all that outward difference and finding some common ground. Maybe we need some skeletons in this country. But yeah, they're not serious. They're comical, they're cute, they're fun, and very big influence on young Orozco, young Rivera. And this is the guy, like I said last week, who kind of brought them all together. He's like the Emerson or like the Thoreau, and he was an artist, and he basically wanted these Mexican muralists to, using the Mexican Revolution, to come up with this uniquely Mexican art form, which maybe has one foot in indigenous history, one foot in the New World. And so Orozco, I think, takes a very ground level view of everything. While he's in Mexico during the revolution, now he's not a revolutionary, it's very hard to find a revolution by one hand, and also he's an artist, so he's not like someone who's, Siqueiros will be someone who's actually a fighter in the revolution, whereas I think Orozco is taking kind of a view of the revolution while he's in Mexico, but not, you know, from the battlefield, but so much as kind of the way Mexico life is unfolding during the revolution. And so he starts painting women in, I think, a brothel. I think these are from the brothel, these early pictures that he does. And these do get him kind of in trouble for, you know, deciding to paint kind of the lowest rungs of society. Let me kind of get ahead here. And he's also someone who supported Carranza. Let me see, wait. Yes, and then when Carranza was defeated by his enemy, by Obregón basically kind of, Orozco was cool with Obregón. Basically, they all buried the hatches and were cool with kind of moving forward and letting all those grudges, putting all those grudges aside. So that's great. You know, I think that's part of the outcome of the revolution, was kind of moving past all the kind of infighting, political infighting, and finding some kind of peace with, you know, not, you know, holding grudges with your enemies. So yeah, I think when you look at Orozco's work, it's really all about him having that first-hand experience with the Mexican Revolution and not romanticizing it. So that's why you see in these drawings, you know, just butchery and cruelty and, you know, a lot of, you know, even though it's a revolution, it's totally chaotic. You know, all kinds of horrible things happen. This looks like a general who took a child as a kind of lover. Likewise here. So these are all really, you know, unflinching pictures of from the revolution, you know, kind of told through kind of a cartoony kind of style. I think he kind of is the first one who sets this template for, like, you know, this picture itself, kind of exile or diaspora, or people migrating, which is almost like cliche at this point in art. You see, you know, boats, Cuba, a big part of Cuban art, like boats, people leaving, and migration is such a big part of art today. I think it kind of goes back to Orozco in a lot of ways. Here you can see him talking about oil. The oil, the way the Mexican government was kind of deeply involved with the oil industry, and the people feeling that like the government's selling out to the United States and other countries selling oil. So that's definitely lurking in the background. And you notice a very satirical style in his artwork. It's kind of cartoony and satirical, but also the other range is kind of more dark and gothic, kind of like you see here. And he has to basically decide at some point what is going to be his form of expression. And I think that's what's so neat about him. He's sort of figuring out, okay, this works here, this works there. And when he comes to the United States especially, that'll be a really interesting question. So here he is with the opera, the dance company, ballet company, sorry, in Mexico. So he was, you know, painting women in brothels, painting women and people dancing. And I think that really is going to be a major influence on his career, because this experience with dancers is going to, when he gets rid of this kind of cartoony style, he'll go back to kind of drawing, painting women and people, men with very gestured, like dramatic dance-like poses, which will, I think, really be a really useful thing for him moving forward, because that will really, I think, help him figure out what's my style for painting on a mural. Because it's one thing to say, okay, at this scale, cartoon stuff looks good, but when you bring that up to a mural, it might not work. And so you'll see he kind of goes back to his experience drawing dancers as his kind of, when he reevaluates his approach to murals. So these don't get him a lot of positive attention in Mexico. You know, the Catholic Church has a big presence in Mexico, and especially because he's kind of painting stuff from painting kind of the downtrodden, he doesn't get a lot of support. In fact, I think he's actually goes into exile for a year. Yeah, so the negative reaction of critics and moralists, the exhibition of House of Tears paintings compelled Orozco to leave Mexico for the United States. I mean, he must have really, I've never left my country because people were so upset about artwork. But so yeah, he leaves the country and comes back, And again, this is the time of the Russian Revolution, so a lot of change in the air. And this is where he really, when he comes back to Mexico and the Mexican Revolution is over, this is where he really finds his stride. And I think we saw this earlier. This is Cortez and Malinche. Malinche is like the Sacagawea, the Pocahontas of Mexico, but much more of a presence. She's sort of the symbol of indigenous history. And this is, 1926, addressing something from back in the 1500s. And, there's a great example of the whole point of the Mexican Revolution. Muralism is to paint Mexican history in a kind of honest way that updates, Mexican history and remembers the, the
Is that
long.
school for children?
Pardon me?
National Prep, is that a children's school?
Which one? Oh, yeah, so the place, no, it's actually, I think, a college.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a college. But yeah, that's a good question, because all these murals are painted in various different institutions all over Mexico City. Because the whole point is, if you're a illiterate person from the countryside comes to the city, the capital, to get, some kind of paperwork or whatever, they're confronted by this feast of Mexican buffet of Mexican history. And I think that's the whole idea, to kind of paint the history for people who would otherwise not know of anything about their own history. So, these, by the way, this is when the United States went to war with Mexico, we had, U.S. soldiers battling Mexican soldiers right here in the middle of Mexico City. And it's kind of wild to think about that. That happened in 1848. And so here's the college, and the beautiful kind of building in which a lot of these murals are painted. And here's one of his early works, and I think you can see there's what do you think? Anything kind of Christian here?
Mm-hmm. Donna and Child.
Yeah, so, it's interesting to compare him to Diego Rivera, because immediately you see that I think Diego Rivera suffers from that kind of communist disdain for religion. And I don't think Orozco, because he's not as ideological, he doesn't have that kind of contempt. And I think that's what makes him kind of address some Christian subject matter in a much more kind of like non-ideological way. But he did get in some trouble for this from the Catholic Church. Well, why might that be?
She's naked.
She's naked, right? Very good. Jesus naked, that's fine, little baby, but not Virgin Mary. And so I think that might have gotten him in a little bit of trouble. But from our perspective, I think there's nothing kind of too racy about it. It looks pretty touching. But it's interesting to think that he's already kind of right out of, because this is part of the commissions for the Mexican muralists from the Mexican government. So he's kind of, I think, looking immediately to kind of Christian subject matter. And then he does this one here, which we'll see again, which is Jesus destroying the cross. And what do you think about? So, when I think of Jesus, and, I've got my own sort of personal, interest in, which Jesus is kind of the, there's Jesus that's kind of on the cross, there's baby Jesus, there's, this kind of Jesus. And when I think of Jesus in Catholicism versus Protestantism, I tend to think of the Catholic Church, you have a relationship with Jesus, but the Catholic Church is kind of in between, and whereas with Protestantism, it's like direct Jesus straight to the kind of believer.
Right.
And so this feels more like Protestant Jesus. And so that's, for me, what's interesting. It's almost like a little mini Protestant revolution within Orozco's kind of framework. So he ends up destroying this, I think because he got some grief in Mexico about this. What do you think might upset people? Is it, for me, it's like the cross, it's like, at first glance, like cutting down the cross seems like, oh, that's bad, but then you're like, wait a minute, the cross is bad in a way because it's like Roman punishment, so it really kind of depends on how you kind of define it. But I could certainly see why maybe people in Mexico, Catholics, might be like, there's something iconoclastic about this.
It also looks like him.
Okay, like Orozco?
Yes,
Yeah,
it
it's-
does.
It's not,
Rather
it doesn't look
than
like typical Jesus,
He's
right?
got the mustache and that stern.
Yeah, and I think that's the
face.
idea, is almost like Jesus is like a Mexican revolutionary or something.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of how it feels. I don't think I've seen many depictions of Jesus with short hair.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, we'll think about that again when we see other versions of it, because we'll see him, revisit this. But that could very well be part of why, you've depicted Jesus in an unconventional way, so that could be it. But he ends up painting over it because of criticism, but we'll see it in a moment. And this is the other kind of style, this more satirical parody style. It kind of reminds, the statue on Beixo of Botero, the big kind of heavy set one that's kind of
Yes.
parodying like Latin American wealth or something, I think. I don't know, I've never really studied his work. That kind of reminds me of this kind of a cartoony style. And this is him, I think, trying to figure out what is appropriate for muralism. And this is his first kind of answer to that question. I don't wanna spend too much time on this, so you can kind of get a general sense of his, where he's going, and I think you can kind of see, he's kind of picking on the rich. He's not, very different than Diego Rivera, who's more kind of focused on communism and or indigenous culture. Here, it's more like he's really attacking the rich for, well, what do you think? What's he saying about the rich here?
They're stepping on people.
They're stepping on
Yeah.
people, yeah, they're kind of trampling on people, looking all kind of like,
Looking up, never looking
yeah,
down.
looking up.
Well, that one lady is, but
Oh,
it's
yeah,
like,
she's with
but it's more
disdain.
like, what did I just step on?
Yeah.
Kind of
What's
like,
on my shoe?
Yeah.
Yeah, good,
Like she
very
looks
good.
like she just stepped on top.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I think you nailed it. So and while I do love it, it definitely is a little weird almost to see this kind of cartoony style on a wall. And I think he will eventually come to that same conclusion. It's kind of reminds me like carnival-esque or maybe like something you see in an amusement park. Ice Cream Heaven on Davis Island, as a reminder. If you ever went to Ice Cream Heaven on Davis Island, this guy who worked there, he had his whole place painted with murals. It reminds me of this. Clearly, none of you guys ever went to Ice Cream Heaven. But anyway, and here, this looks like a last judgment, like Jesus presiding over everybody and judging everybody. It looks like the rich. So maybe there's a criticism of religion here where they're applauding, this kind of, I don't know, smug Jesus, godlike figure. But it does look like a last judgment because you got the little devils here. Pushing people off to probably to hell, although they're indigenous people, so it looks kind of like he's criticizing the church, possibly here. And that's a little red revolutionary hat, and yeah, I mean, we could spend a lot of time on this. I just want to keep going so we can kind of see the bigger picture of how his work. So yeah, you definitely see contempt for the rich, support for the common person. What about the church, of course? And now you start seeing him shift to this more monumental style. And this is where not only does he shift his colors, but also, and thank you, Jeff Greenberg, for that. It also kind of goes back to, like I said, like something that looks for me like more like dancers on stage. It looks much more theatrical in that kind of monumental way. Like what a great shift, because it really seems to work more when it comes to like murals and what's kind of more appropriate for the public space. And the cartoony style is cool, but I think those belong more on newsprint and kind of as a kind of more, I don't know, mainstream kind of medium. Whereas, it's like, that's why I think muralism is so, you can't get, it's almost like he's realizing it's a holy space, sacred space, and you really don't want to use that sacred space for parody or satire, so which is for monumental and big emotional, and I think that's really what you see here. And really, I mean, how powerful, and notice what we got here, he really wanted to leave Jesus. He painted over everything, but kept Jesus' head there. And that must be a little like, I can do whatever I want. I'm going to keep him there. And good for him. And you notice all the red, he's really toned down everything to one monochromatic. This is the creation here, the Virgin Mary over there. But this is really powerful. And this is, a lot of Christ-like qualities to the kind of crucified, struggling, Pancho Villa-like, revolutionary with the, bullets on either side. But yeah, there's Jesus, and now it's a strike. So I think he almost has like this. It reminds me of Last Temptation of Christ. Have you ever seen that movie? It's not necessarily a very good movie because I saw it recently. It's hit or miss. But it kind of like Jesus is like the kind of what's it called? Like the social justice Jesus. Is sort of like not necessarily the Jesus who's kind of like there's like the judgmental, the Jesus with the darker eye and the brighter eye in Greek Orthodoxy. There's like a punishing Jesus who's like gonna get you. Then there's like the revolutionary Jesus who's like the kind of social justice. I think that's kind of, I feel like Orozco is kind of like seeing Jesus as very much like this kind of revolutionary, which is very, really interesting, because you don't see Jesus anywhere in Diego Rivera's work. So anyway, yes, we're going to see him again, and yeah, here are his, and I think this really sets the tone for Orozco's style. It's very, really powerful work when he chooses to get away from the more cartoony style into something more, I don't know, just more, it's still kind of, I don't know what you call it, like somewhat, I want to say cartoony,
Was he from a
flowy.
thematic. What's that?
Was he from a poor background? I mean,
Yeah,
is that,
no,
because,
well,
is that what, because
yeah, compared to, I mean, I don't think Diego Rivera is a little wealthier, and I don't think he's from an impoverished background, but I think he's from away from the kind of urban centers. So, but I think he's probably, like a lot of Mexicans, much more familiar with like rural life than,
because of
typical
what he
Americans.
feels about the upper echelon.
Yeah, I definitely think he was definitely not from the upper classes, but I'll look into that and get back to you, but I think that's probably a spot on, that he really was kind of felt alienated from that. Because remember, in Mexico, we're talking about elite, the super elite, and we have that here too, but it's a much bigger degree of kind of difference between the average, and except for, of course, Elon Musk. He's now a trillionaire. And God bless him for that, and don't fault him for that at all. But so blue and red are really become this really neat kind of color choice that he picks, and you'll see this throughout the rest of his career. I think it's very powerful, and this will have a big impact on a few artists in the United States. We'll see later. But so yeah, it looks like he's really telling the story of like workers and struggle, and here's the same period when he makes the Malinche and Cortez, and yeah, what a cool location. It looks like a real pain in the butt to paint. You really have to imagine, like, you don't see them on the scaffolds.
That's wild.
Yeah, it really is neat, and what beautiful building to paint on. So yeah, we went over this briefly, but it's telling the story. It's not a flattering picture of Cortez, and it's not like he's coercing Malinche, he's kind of keeping her in control. But it's again another example of stripping down the outward appearance of difference to the common denominator, which is almost like Adam and Eve here, like almost like Genesis of Mexico, with this kind of stillborn baby down below, and kind of a very kind of maybe contradictory body language and or a lot of tension there. I mean, what do you think he's saying here ultimately with this picture about Cortez and Malinche? It's not positive, right?
Is that
No,
still
he's suppressing her.
an adult?
Yeah, it looks like, yeah, exactly, it looks like a little adult down below. Yeah, and I think that, I'm not really sure why he chose to do that, except to maybe make it, he probably didn't want it to be too baby-like, because he didn't want to be too kind of like, oh, happy family. It's more like, it's a stillborn adult who's kind of a byproduct of this
I have a question.
forced union.
And it keeps coming up for me. Do these artists ever have like an exhibition to show off and explain
Yes.
where they?
Well, explain, I don't know, I mean, some, I'm sure individually, and I could read you some excerpts from things I've seen where they talk about their work, but there will be a big show that we'll see at the end here of Mexican art in 1940, and that's really the culmination of this whole effort of bringing, building bridges with Mexico and the United States, and the 1940 MoMA show in the Museum of Modern Art will really be the
Because I was just wondering if they want people to understand what they're trying to present, like the history.
Yeah, well, I think for him, the idea would be the average indigenous person from Mexico will visit this, the city hall or whatever, or this, preparatory, and, get a scholarship to come to the capital to learn and discover their history in this way, because otherwise you don't read about it necessarily in school, you read a very kind of one-sided view of it. So I think the idea was to sort of just, again, kind of rewrite or update Mexican history after the Mexican Revolution, and kind of update it in a way that's more conclusive and makes everyone in Mexico feel like they're part of Mexican history, rather than just the elite. And that's why, of course, the Catholic Church is such a tricky part, because a lot of these people from this period are getting educated, and it's very hard to separate the Catholic Church's kind of erasure of Aztec history with, and forgive the Catholic Church. I think it's hard for us in the United States to appreciate how much the Church played a role in that conquest, whereas in the United States, it's all about getting away from kind of Henry VIII and separating church and state and having a place of religious freedom. So very different, whereas the Catholics in Spain arrived in the New World with this sort of, we just defeated the Moors, we just reconquered Spain, and let's just keep killing people, let's just keep enslaving people. I don't mean that literally, but I think they really had this kind of bloodthirsty sense of religion and violence, which was part of the 800-year conflict, which was the reconquest of Spain. So, it's very hard to separate the Catholic Church from that history. So anyways, here we get to, so this is an interesting example of academic painting from the late 1800s. This is Bartolomé de las Casas. This is the guy who basically said to the King of Spain, let's stop enslaving indigenous people. They're really not, they're worthy of protection. And if he had stopped the letter there, we would all love him. But then he said, why don't we enslave Africans instead? And that's what ended up happening. So he substituted one evil for another. And that's why indigenous people in Mexico still celebrate Bartolomé de las Casas. But if you're African descent, you're going to say this guy's the worst, because he's the reason why the slave trade came to the New World. But this is the kind of academic style, more European style, that artists like Orozco really wanted to get away from. and or even stuff like this. But even here, you can see they're already reframing the conquest as a kind of massacre. Literally, it's a massacre. And this is Christ-like qualities of this guy, and Virgin Mary-like quality of her with the baby. So there's already this shift in Mexican history where artists are trying to kind of tell the story of Mexican history in a much more honest way that doesn't, celebrate people like Cortez and really celebrates kind of the average Mexican. So right around here, he gets discovered by Alma Reed. She's one of those awesome kind of people who was going to Mexico and interested in this, what's going on in Mexico, and is one of the people who really kind of sets in motion this kind of trajectory where these Mexican muralists will end up coming to the United States to basically kind of put to shame all the artists in the United States who are still kind of getting our act together. Because we don't have this Mexican Revolution inspiring our art. The American Revolution happened many centuries before, and so artists like Jackson Pollock, who's from California, will visit this, and this will inspire Jackson Pollock to become, in a lot of ways, to become the famous artist that we know of, or many people know of today. I don't know if Jackson Pollock's a household name. I don't know if he should be, but he's definitely was inspired by this. And Prometheus has a lot of Jesus-like qualities. Bringing fire to mankind, suffering. I think he got his liver eaten by an eagle once every day. I think an eagle came and ate his liver or something. One part of his body, I can't remember which. But that's what Prometheus was punished for that. And this is in Pomona College, very interesting Gothic kind of style there. But so this is one of the first paintings painted by Orozco in the United States. So it's interesting to think about, like, he's picking a subject that has, you can see it as a bridge between, or something that goes beyond.
How would he know about him?
Yeah, well, I think if you had.
What kind of education do he have?
Well, yeah, exactly. It makes you start realizing, okay, so the Greco-Roman kind of, what is, if you're in Mexico, you kind of go back, Spanish history, Catholic history, but of course, people are aware of Greek and Roman mythology, and I think.
So he was aware of.
Well, yeah, I think what he's trying to do here is like, well, if I'm going to paint something in the United States, what do I paint? It's sort of like if I said, hey, paint something in Mexico, you'd have to think, well, what can I paint that's not just me being an American in Mexico kind of thing? Let me pick something that's going to speak beyond maybe my own worldview and reach out, and that's where I think you really see him interested in Pan-Americanism.
There was another famous artist who did a painting called Prometheus Bound.
Yeah,
Where
Prometheus
he
Bound.
was chained to a rock and the buzzards are coming down
Yep.
to eat his liver every day.
Yeah, and I think Prometheus Bound is actually the name of the play by Aeschylus, the original kind of play, the tragedy of Prometheus. And yeah, we see different versions of Prometheus by different artists, and I think what he basically was like, I need to paint something that transcends our cultural differences and is like a common, so again, like the skeleton, or like kind of getting rid of any outward appearance of difference. Prometheus is like something that transcends Latin America and the United States and becomes, I think, something that we all can kind of relate to, despite not being from Mexico or being from the United States. So I think this is him kind of reinventing his subject matter for a new kind of world, or a new kind of host environment, which is the United States. And here's the Prometheus. This is one he does for the MoMA, the Zapatistas, and then one we'll see in a moment from Dartmouth College. These are just my notes of my students and looking at that. And this is from, by the way, a book called Vita Americana, some of these notes here, so yeah, I can find these passages next time if I can see anything about him saying what he's trying to do with his work. So, well, he's the first Mexican muralist, so he beats Diego Rivera. His first comes to the United States before Diego Rivera. And we'll see Rivera arrives in 31 in the 40s, and Siqueiros is in the 30s. And here is Orozco looking as miserable as possible, surrounded by New Yorkers who are, clearly looks like he'd rather be painting.
Yeah.
I'm happy.
And that's Alma Reed here in the middle. But you have to suffer through this stuff as an artist or as a musician or as anything. You have to deal with a lot of the kind of, the revelry.
The patrons.
Yeah, patrons, exactly. So, they're just all having fun. And it looks like life was a lot of fun in the 1920s, Jazz Age, before the Great Depression. Very interesting time period. And so this is one of these kind of cartoons he does when he comes to the United States. Tourists and Aztecs. So I think that's kind of him on the lower right, kind of feeling, or at least kind of saying, Mexico and the United States, this is kind of, the contrast between the two could not be more pronounced. And here it looks like the same rich people was lampooning before, although in this case he's not really lampooning them. So you can see him shifting his kind of how he understands rich people when it comes to the United States. Because they're not the same people stepping on the Mexicans, So it's interesting to think about, like, it's not a universal thing. And this is, he starts doing drawings of stuff that took place during the Mexican Revolution, thinking, okay, I'm gonna offer the same kind of unflinching work, but it doesn't really sell at all because it's just probably too violent. The subject matter is not as appealing as they thought it would be to the U.S. market. And so he goes back to the drawing board, and this is when he makes this lithograph, and this is much more commercial. This is much more high demand, this kind of style. So again, he's going back to that monumental style, and I think it was very effective because he continues kind of with that, and it opens a lot of doors to him. And this is really where he, I think people really discover his kind of, this first Mexican muralist, and leads to the modern art show you see here, and Prometheus, and then he comes back to the East Coast and paints his first mural. By the way, again, a lot of Mexicans are being forcibly repatriated back to Mexico, while people like Orozco and Diego Rivera are the exception. They're in the United States, so it's a very interesting time, kind of like today. A lot of kind of tension about the border, and so he paints this mural called "Call to Revolution" and "Table of Universal Brotherhood" at the New School, New School for Workers, which is very political, very communist kind of leaning, workers' rights kind of place in Lower Manhattan. You can see it, photographed by Walker Evans. And what do you think? This is his kind of first big kind of commission in the United States.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Nixon, over there on the left.
Say it again?
Nixon.
Yeah, I think these are all meant to be the world leaders. I find it really kind of like that. Something about it really doesn't work. And I say this with as much love as possible.
Floating up.
What's that?
The table looks like it's floating.
Yeah, the table is all wonky and it's not in perspective, which is fine. But and it's funny. It's not. You think you go with a round table, but it's just something awkward about it, and including the people who are sitting around the table who look like they're like completely isolated. So this is him, I think, kind of trying to figure out, okay, what do I paint? I'm in the United States. I'm getting commissioned, so he's not painting the Mexican Revolution anymore. And so I think you have to really appreciate that he's kind of got this real challenge, which is, what do I paint now that I'm in the United States? What's his sort of subject matter? What's his style? What's his what's his message? So he's still, I think you can see traces of the style, the colors, the subject matter. But it's not. These are Mexican workers, and he's in Mexico painting this, whereas now he's in New York City. And so he's trying, I think, to kind of United Nations, maybe offer this kind of vision of unity.
Table's too big.
Pardon me?
The table is too big.
Yeah, it's too big. It kind of dwarfs all the subjects.
And there's no
Justification for being so big.
no, and there's nothing. There's one book on it, so it's
We don't
not
know what
like.
page it is. Yeah, I really want to know more about that book.
It's a very strange.
It is
focal
very
point.
strange. It is very strange.
Strange
But I think he did a good job on the facial, but
Yeah, no, it's just
see a different ethnic.
yeah, I know. It absolutely captured that what we're supposed to see, which is kind of the whole world, around, kind of like the whole world represented.
I guess if that was 1930, that wasn't Nixon, but it kind of looked like it.
Okay, so you met this guy here, resembling
The third guy.
this guy. Oh yeah, he kind of looks like Bush though too.
Oh, it could be, yeah.
Yeah, but
Was
it's-
that
Could be.
painted in 30s?
Yeah, it's painted in the 30s, so it probably isn't Nixon unless he's really got a time machine and anticipated, But yeah, so here's the other side of the room. Here's this wall and this wall, and already I gotta say, like modern architecture, while it does have wonderful big open spaces, it's not quite as nice as painting in a classical building or a
No,
church.
they don't frame the paintings very
Right, and the lighting's weird, and just look at it's there's something, it doesn't as glorious as a painting in like a classical building. And I think you can see he's still trying to figure out, how do I organize space in a mural? Because what is it? Is there a horizon line that connects it all? Is it is there one central subject? The same issues that dogged Diego Rivera. Like, how do you connect all these things together into something coherent? And I think you gotta also appreciate too, he's not someone who really is romanticizing anything here. It's almost like treating it very matter of fact, and the colors are they all feel very kind of flat and not very dynamic. And I say this because right around the corner, literally, in another room at the new school, is a very famous painter from the United States named Thomas Hart Benton. And we could spend a whole, lecture or series on him itself, and we'll see some of his work. But he's literally painting, the new school commissioned him to do a mural in the adjacent room. And what you see in the adjacent room, and here's Orozco painting it, and his assistant, I guess it's literally his left
Looks
hand
like
or right
Gandhi.
hand. And this is a very positive, like this way, very positive view of like productivity, creation. There's almost like a guy with an axe. It's almost, maybe this is Jesus again with an axe. We've seen a guy holding an axe too before. So, but this is Thomas Benton in the next room, and we'll look at Thomas Benton more later. But his work is so spectacular. He's really dynamic.
What building in New York City?
This is in Greenwich Village. I think at the New School for Social Research, like right around 14th
New
Street.
School.
Yeah, the New School. And I mean, this is really, I mean, so impressive. I remember seeing this in my high school, AP US book. I'm like, what is this thing there? So it's just adding these architectural elements to make it more dramatic. And I mean, just look at how exciting this is. I mean, this is just so like exciting and dramatic and blah than this. And I say this because we're building up to, I think, Orozco's response to this influence, which is very positive and powerful. But also you're already seeing that Orozco doesn't romanticize things like technology, and that will really be different than Benton. This is Benton really celebrating technology. Like you can almost feel like Aaron Copland playing in the back of your head, like a fanfare for the common man or something. Dum dum dum, dum dum dum. And so, this really is like the American muralists celebrating technology. This is Benton celebrating, productivity. Obviously, not filtering anything through a communist lens and/or being any, mean-spirited or cynical about the rich. There's really nothing. It feels very inclusive and/or kind of celebrating all facets, and maybe folky perhaps, but still like very talented, very a lot of dynamic, kind of really good at kind of organizing space in a way that's really kind of. I'm still looking at different things going on there, kind of making things out. And so this is a really cool thing to have going on right next to Orozco. Maybe for a little while Orozco was like really bummed, but then he processes like, okay, how can I, take this influence and maybe do something, my own thing with it. So not only does he have Benton there, now he's got Diego Rivera breathing out of that, because now Diego Rivera is in the United States. So there's the competition anxiety is reaching a fever pitch now with Orozco, and he's really got to leave his mark in the United States. So right around after he finishes his New School mural, he gets a commission in Dartmouth to paint his famous Dartmouth mural. So now we get to look at those. And I think what's so cool about the Dartmouth murals, I think he really took the influence by Benton and really applied some of the dynamic and colors to his mural, and it made the mural all the more beautiful and impressive. And it definitely has some of this kind of dialectic of kind of themes in history, conflict between the rich and the poor, but I don't think it's as overtly communist as you might expect from someone like Diego Rivera. And here's Dartmouth. What's that?
I
Yes?
have a question. So what inspired these universities like Dartmouth to want a Mexican artist?
Right, I think it was really, one, they were just like, ooh, like this cool thing from another place that's like unique, and really I think they all wanted to kind of let a little bit of that like rub off on them. And so, and not all places, I think San Francisco is really all in on it. Rockefeller didn't like the Lenin was included in Rockefeller, so in the Rockefeller mural, so Rockefeller destroyed the Diego Rivera mural. So each place had their own kind of, I think, thing to gain from it, depending on, in this case, it might have been Rockefeller. I think in a lot of cases, the presidents want, so in this case, they were hoping for something very different. So that's a great question, because what they were hoping for was a kind of, when they had commissioned Orozco, they were thinking, oh, he's going to paint this kind of cute little, like, and he didn't do that. But I'll show you, I know this because once Orozco finished his mural, they said, wait, that's not what we wanted. And then they hired another muralist to paint a whole bunch, and I'll show you.
Is this Dartmouth?
Yeah, the Dartmouth, but I'll show you both. And the ones that they painted give you a sense of what they were really hoping for, and I think you'll really be like, whoa. Okay, so here's Dartmouth College, beautiful building, and here you can see some of his sketching, it's very interesting to see how he's organizing space. You know, he's got these dynamic lines that establish a kind of coherence to everything. You notice there's snakes down there below. He'll substitute those snakes later for something else. So some things do change. You can see how it's organized here around the library. And it starts with the kind of migration from perhaps, Alaska to the New World. So it's telling a chronological story of people maybe crossing the isthmus. Look at those students, they have no interest whatsoever in the mural. I'm just kidding, it's good that they're studying. But yeah, so you can see it's really telling the story of indigenous people perhaps migrating, into the New World. You got that red and blue, which clearly become his kind of color palette of choice.
He's got a beautiful blue.
Yeah, it's really, his work is really so, it's not like, Diego Rivera, you can almost feel him trying to impress you, whereas I think Orozco is just really like, just kind of doesn't care what people think. He's got his thing he's gonna do and he's gonna do it. And it's not like, when you look at Diego Rivera's work, Diego Rivera would be like, I need it to look exactly like this piece of like pottery that I unearthed, this idol that I unearthed, I need it to be exact. Whereas Orozco is like, yeah, I'm just gonna do like, kind of, almost looks like the Avengers here or something, like kind of this fantasy version of Aztec culture, because he's not about romanticizing Aztec culture. I think you can see that here. He's showing, human sacrifice. So, I think he's basically saying there's cruelty, there's beauty in all cultures. It's more about maybe class conflict, or, it's up to you to kind of interpret. What I like about his work is it's not so easily interpreted. It's somewhat, mystical or kind of mysterious. And this is Quetzalcoatl, the kind of Jesus-like figure of indigenous history, who brought, of Prometheus-like figure, who brought agriculture and other things to indigenous world. He's kind of seen as like the savior figure of Aztec culture. And so you can see him chronologically going through, again, these are like Aztec gods, but not at all kind of quote accurate. They're sort of more just how Orozco, wants to see them. And here's a, very Jesus Christ-like quality to Quetzalcoatl. But he's seeing Quetzalcoatl as kind of like an archetype of like savior figure, like a Promethean-like figure, like you see here. So again, he's trying to kind of maybe, he was told, tell the history of American civilization, and this is what Orozco chose to do. Sacrifice, I think development, this is kind of like the, kind of reminds me of the Diego Rivera figure, this guy here. This is, I think, a similar kind of central subject holding everyone together. But then he's got he's pointing, that's Quetzalcoatl there again, pointing, and he's pointing to the tools of destruction. You can see by the snakes get replaced. And Quetzalcoatl is pointing to, I don't know why I can't, there it is, the cross. So this is the arrival of the Spanish with the cross and kind of civilization. So he's basically pointing, telling the Native Americans, this is the arrival of the Spanish. So it's not even like, oh no, they're bad. It's just like, this is inevitable, kind of, this is what's coming next. So almost like a Christ-like figure being consumed in waves and snakes here. It's this fist became a snake here. So it's very interesting. It's because it's not so clear what he thinks about one group or the next. It's just sort of, he's telling the story of history, and these are just some details he has. And you notice his view of technology is very negative. Technology is really, and starting here, you see the Spanish arrival. So here's Cortez, and here's the cross. Here's the Spanish ships that were burned by Cortez, so the soldiers couldn't return to Spain. And that's what you see on the left, the burning ships. So Cortez burned his ships so his troops wouldn't go back, and they had to go with him to conquer the Aztecs. And I'd say this is not a very positive view of Christianity here, right? It's kind of like violence and conquer, and this is why I think it's really hard for us to appreciate how much the Catholic Church was seen as part of this kind of reconquest, especially by the indigenous people. Like here, conquering in God's name or in the name of gold, God, and glory. So it continues on here, and you see this next panel is very almost disturbing. I love it. It's so cool, but it's really a very kind of stifling, suffocating view of technology. It's not at all like Benton, who celebrates technology. It feels like he's just got a very pessimistic view of technology. And then again, another part that is really weird and creepy is like Children of the Corn or something, right? With a school teacher who, even my students can't tell, like, we can't decide if this is positive or negative. It's like, a school teacher. Remember, this is the epic of American civilization. So he's a school teacher with a book with a bunch of zombie-like kids. I don't know if they're all supposed to be, if this is positive or negative. It doesn't look very positive, does it? They're wrong here, and they're all gathered around something, and I don't know what they're gathered around. So I don't know if this is meant to be, but this seems like a depiction of the United States, and yet it's not really clear what's going on. You agree? It's kind of unclear what's going
A lot
on.
of blondes,
What's that?
a lot of blondes.
A lot of blonde, yeah. So I don't know if that's like bad blonde or good blonde or just blonde. But it seems like he's kind of trying to navigate the differences between Mexico and the United States. And here you got the Mexican Revolution with a very kind of melancholy-looking Pancho Villa, surrounded by Mexican, what looked like kind of Simon Bolivar, Mexican, generals and soldiers with American soldiers perhaps on the other side. And then a very negative view, and we talk about biting the hand that feeds you. In the next part you see this. I mean, Dartmouth College commissions him to make a mural, and he's like, okay. And here's
Oh,
like,
shoot, yeah,
so here's like
academia, look at them.
yeah, academia in the back. That's like looks like the trustees. And by the way, here's funny. George Bush actually Senior. There's George Bush Senior. He went to Dartmouth College. Oh, and so did Conan O'Brien apparently. And so that's like the kind of robes that the people are wearing in the background. So I think this is definitely biting the hand that feeds you.
Yeah.
He just didn't care.
Very critical.
No.
This is one of the more famous works by him that I remember seeing before learning about Orozco. And I mean, it's looked like a little like zombie baby skeleton. Now this is interesting to me because yeah, what's that?
With the
It has a
graduation
graduation
cap.
cap.
Yeah, with a graduation cap. And this is not like Happy
birthday
Posada and skeletons, like the skeletons.
No.
These are like very like what we would see as like negatives, dreary, like grim skeletons. And I assume that's like academia giving birth to like some kind of like zombie baby kind of thing. It's not at all positive, right? You agree on that?
So
Yeah.
that's a lady delivering a baby.
Yeah, I think is that seems like a woman delivering a baby on a bunch of books, and I still have a hard time with this because like, what's wrong with books? Why are
Yeah.
books bad? Why have books become bad? So I
And then
get it.
there's like specimen jars.
Yeah,
Yes.
specimen jars, exactly.
What the?
Right.
And her face is melted. Or
Right, and right.
The skeleton that's giving birth, its face is
Right,
melted.
and this is kind of, I hate to say it, but this is why I like Orozco, because I don't really have a clear sense.
What's in the specimen jar?
Was
Other
it
skeletons.
other skeleton babies, I think.
Other little skeletons.
Yeah, it's kind of like and so I think you're gonna understand this in a moment when you see the mural that they commissioned,
That they really wanted.
that they really wanted, okay? Because this is what I think is going on here. Orozco's, in the freezing cold, as far from Mexico as possible, like it's snowing up to his head
Did they
outside.
pay him before or after?
After. And he's painting this, and they're snickering, and now I'm just speculating here, but there's snickering going on right here by Dartmouth College students who are like making fun of him, and at some point the snickering turns to, hey, he's making fun of Dartmouth College itself, and somewhere along the lines the administrators get involved, and they probably write him a check, and we've got another muralist we're gonna hire to
But
do
it's
what
still
we're really
hanging.
hoping for.
It's still hanging.
Oh, well, this one's still hanging. The other one is hiding.
Which one is hiding?
You'll see the other one they hired another guy to
Another
do
guy.
after
Oh.
this one, after this
I
one.
thought that's
So-
what they wanted.
What, this is you could say this is the best example of trolling in the history, haha, I'm gonna do something that you didn't want, and now it's celebrated because Orozco is so important historically that it's bigger than Dartmouth in a way, and bigger than their petty. So let's go on to the mural. Well, let's first look at the Jesus he does here at the end there. We'll get back to that later in a moment. So this all reaches this pinnacle with Jesus, and we saw him before. Now we've got a more Jesus Christ looking Jesus. It almost looks like Greek Orthodox Jesus or something. And you can see in the back we've got idols of Buddha, a Doric Ionic column, a tank. So and a lot of machinery. So and he's very. Diego Rivera was very technology, Detroit automobiles until the communists don't sell out, and then he's like, oh, I mean, capitalism's bad and communism's great. That seems like what's going on. Whereas Orozco's just I hate technology. It's all cruel and so it seems like and tell me if I'm wrong. He's the church and the cross is kind of technology. Seems like that's what he's saying. Or the cross is Jesus, and I don't think this is a negative view of Jesus necessarily, right? What do you think? I mean, it's definitely not a very picture of skin. The skin looks kind of 28 days later zombie kind of skin. But apart from that, I mean, he's kind of like cutting down the cross. You could interpret that as like, I'm standing up for the Romans kind of thing.
Well, I mean, you know, we talk of Jesus defeating the cross.
Yeah.
The intention of the cross, what it
Yeah.
was as as Roman torture,
Right.
it became something else.
Right, exactly. It became something else. So yeah, I think he's going back to it as kind of a, like, I can't help but chopping Washington and the cherry tree. I can't help but think of like something famous, chopping something down. But chopping something down is like either destructive or kind of like, let me, you know, take control of my destiny kind of thing.
It's like
So
When
Jesus
he's
the
done this-
revolutionary.
yeah,
And
Jesus the revolutionary.
And he's done this twice now, where Jesus.
Yeah, well actually he'll have a third one. So yeah, that's his
Jesus destroying
Jesus with the cross, destroyed, and we never saw this with, you know, we didn't see this with Diego Rivera, so I think this is why I think Orozco offers a much more, not an ideological view of Christianity so much as let me treat Jesus as a real revolutionary and really have a relationship with him. That's much more like a Protestant relationship, because this is kind of Protestant Jesus in a way.
And it's what, you know, the leaders at the time of Jesus felt he was revolutionary.
Right.
You know, we see it and go, oh, Jesus, you know, but
Right,
he was revolutionary.
right,
And in his time and his thoughts about
yeah.
God, you know.
But of course, at the same time, it's hard to not see, like, it seems like they're kind of throwing out all these idols as like, kind of, he's saying this is all like, kind of refuse, so it's hard not to see that as like a criticism of religion too. So again, I love that he keeps it kind of open to interpretation, and or somewhat confusing. It's also beautiful, I mean, this is another one of the ones that people might have seen before, because it's so iconic, it really stands really wonderfully on its own. And he can do, you know, objects in perspective, unlike that table that he did earlier.
Horrible table.
But so the paintings that they wanted, the ones that they really wanted, are, and by the way, he's kind of, you know, in terms of anticipating technology, you know, right around the corner is, you know, World War I, and of course, you know, nuclear bomb. So he's definitely kind of more accurate as far as like technology is kind of double-edged sword. But so the murals that they wanted. So after he completes these murals, he realized, okay, this is not what they wanted, because this is what they commissioned another muralist to paint these, and these have all been as kind of pilloried and rejected as possible. So what you see is this, well, you tell me, what do you see here?
Ben Franklin. or
Yeah, it looks like Ben Franklin or the Quaker Oats guy.
Indians.
And he's got a drum, and what's in that big container there?
Probably liquor.
Liquor, lots of liquor. And the
And a
Native Americans are showing up in their,
And the skunk.
let's
The
see.
skunk stinks.
Oh yeah, so by the way, this is Walter Beach Humphrey persuaded President Ernest Martin Hopkins to allow him to create another mural that would be more Dartmouth than Carrick.
Old fat white guy, lots of boobs.
Yeah, a lot. So he paints the, you know, Quaker Oats alcohol guy. Has a bunch of his, you know, Caucasian friends posed as indigenous women. Yeah, this is definitely kind of, you can see why this is not, you know, in terms of social justice, kind of Dartmouth, you know, being a, probably like many schools, epicenter of, you know, wanting to not look like a bunch of racists, whatever. This is definitely going the other direction of that.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I mean, okay, if I'm gonna be a little more kind of forgiving, yeah, okay, it's like bridge, you know, peace, alcohol, we're gonna party, have a party, but,
Wow.
you know, so kind of cornball.
What looks collegey.
Yeah, and they're just
Oh,
kind of
man,
getting
it's
drunk,
horrible.
you got a
Wow.
you got a
my God.
They had a frat party.
They had it was a kegger.
This huge.
They had a kegger.
Kegger. Yep, and so, you know, that's, you know, Orozco does like, oh, epic of American civilization, Cortez, burn of the ships, like, no, this is what we wanted. Epic of
The
American.
They
natives
didn't
drunk.
specify which
Yeah,
American history they
yeah,
wanted.
it just to make us look good.
What's the snake in the
Wow.
bottom?
And then he thought that made them look
Dartmouth,
good.
and the
And
big
Dion
chief
is dead.
Yeah.
matriculates, so I guess he's graduating, he's going to Dartmouth, the chief is going to Dartmouth.
Yeah,
The
he's
student.
wearing
But what is the
his
snake?
letter.
What is the what?
The snake.
The snake, oh, where's the
Looks like
snake?
he's biting
At his
it in
feet.
the leg.
Oh, the snake down below there?
Oh,
Well,
wow.
oh gosh, I don't know.
Looks like he's
It looks like
Uh-huh.
it looks like a biblical snake, maybe
he
that
have his mouth
unconsciously
open?
channeling the
It's
devil.
like,
Is he gonna
yeah,
bite
yeah, that's what it looks like.
guy?
It's a good
Wow.
question, you know, you've got this like paperwork here, he's wearing like the,
cause he finished college.
Well, he
Yeah,
had his
he
moccasins.
graduated.
He had his moccasins earlier, very nice white moccasins, and
Well, now
all
they
the
look
other
like
Native
loafers.
Americans did too.
Now they look like loafers.
Now they look like loafers.
They
They
do
look
look
like
like
loafers
loafers.
then. The previous one they were wearing those as well.
It looks like something.
It's just funny that that person thought that was better.
So this
What
is
is that?
this is now totally covered up.
Oh, that's
People at Dartmouth College is like completely embarrassed by this mural.
And it should be.
And yet it's
So they
so,
learned a lesson.
yeah, it's so horrible that I think they should leave it up as just like a reminder of how stupid they were. And it's just such a funny,
Oh,
and it just makes Orozco look so good. What's that?
And there's
Still
another
there?
It's still there, just covered up
Yeah, I don't know
with
what
like
all-
a total
it
black
looks like
eye.
a skunk.
There's
on
another
the
skunk.
stuck to
students.
its
Yeah,
leg.
there's a skunk
It
there.
does.
Yeah, it's just, I think distasteful would be
So
the
weird.
word a lot of people would use for this. But it goes to show what Orozco, how cool Orozco was for just like, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do.
No, but it's
And-
above it, it says College of Dartmouth, and like some kind of curriculum vibe
Was the
day or whatever.
faculty and the whole curriculum,
Wow,
and just the
that is
Gothic
just-
lettering adds
Yeah.
insult.
It's just so wrong on so many levels.
It's
So
funny though, he even
very
has but
many.
little reference like the axe cutting down the tree, it's maybe a
Yeah.
reference to Orozco there, who knows? I'd
Well,
really
the-
love to do,
and
like,
the
learn more
skunk.
about
The
this
skunk
artist.
is
The
still there.
skunk,
Yeah.
what the hell, I
It's
mean,
there.
you know,
Yeah, why do you think he put the skunk? There's just like a Bambi kind of
Skunk
Disney.
well, no, but it's a
There's no
skunk
deer,
with
it's
its
a
tail
skunk.
up.
He'd get ready to spray.
He's gonna spray it.
Well, and the snake, I mean, the snake.
The snake
Yes.
looks like it
And the
was
rabbit's
surprised.
just kind of like chilling there next to the axe.
The worst
Like
part
smelling
is
the pipe.
the worst part is the D on the bare chest.
I know.
Oh my God, that's-
Yeah,
That's
for
so
sure. There's a
crap.
squirrel jumping over
Like, it's
here
just
by
so
the way.
disrespectful.
But yeah, the D, and it's a dripping D. It's not just a
So they
D.
painted it.
It's a dripping D.
Oh, man.
It's
Because
dripping
yeah,
because it was like they painted it on there,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like you would do it like a drunken football
Like-
party.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like the fraternity
For the
brothers.
game.
Yeah.
Exactly. It wasn't on there to
What's that
begin
new
with.
thing they're doing now, everybody that's tops off or whatever, where everybody's pulling their shirts off at games?
and it's so insulting to Orozco too, because it's like it's basically
It's
like
that part.
you know think about the Mexican Revolution. Like we're celebrating indigenous history, and then they're like.
Now
Yeah.
you,
Yeah,
now
not
you.
here.
And this is the indigenous people of Dartmouth or that region of the United States. So
Wow.
now on a final note, you asked about the exhibit in 1940. So yeah, it's such a fascinating story. These two murals being side by side. One being so confusing and hard, almost hard. The other being so like ridiculous. So here's Eleanor Roosevelt once again with unknown man from Mexico. Eleanor Roosevelt is a pretty tall lady. But even so, like you almost appreciate the two worlds of difference. And this is part of the good neighbor policy with Mexico to have this Mexican art show in the MoMA in 1940 as a way to say, no, we're brothers and sisters, we all love each other, kumbaya. And the Rockefellers were, I think, the big patrons of the MoMA. So you really have to see that Rockefellers are being major players in this. And it's a chance for Americans to kind of discover, U.S. citizens to discover Mexican history, all of it from the indigenous. Funny they add the plants, like we need to add plants.
I
It's
love
like the
it.
architectural digest, like we need a palm tree in the front, or else this building looks so modern and ugly. We put a plant there.
A lot of plants.
A lot of plants. Yeah, and that's Coatlicue, the snake skirt. The goddess with the snakes on her skirt. Really terrifying stuff. I mean, Aztec art is absolutely terrifying, almost nightmarish. So then we get into the Spanish Baroque, which is almost as creepy because you see these statues which are painted like mannequins, with like blood dripping, and it's really almost like scary to see because it's like real, like living statues that are bleeding, and like it's really kind of bizarre. Especially if you go to Spain, you see Baroque statues. It's like weird, just weird. It's so weird because you're used to seeing like Greek white statues, right? They're painted, and then when they paint it, they add blood and all kinds of weird things. So yeah, Baroque Spanish art. I mean, kind of like you don't know much about it because at that point the Renaissance and other things had kind of shifted art to more England and beyond. But Spain had its own kind of Catholic art still for a little while. And so yeah, this is a major exhibit of Mexican art in the United States for everything kind of folklore, masks. Ex voto paintings we saw from Frida Kahlo. That's really neat to see that for sure. It includes things like car wrecks and I don't know what each of these are, but have to kind of see.
Well,
how
there's
close-
that famous Frida portrait that some people hired her to paint a friend of theirs, and the woman had committed suicide, so it's the building and the woman's
Yeah,
bloody
she's
body
jumping
on the
down,
street.
Yeah.
They were
her
not
work is-
happy with that portrait.
Yeah, really, you can appreciate Frida Kahlo's unique take on art compared to the muralist, which is very different, more public, more big. This is Posada, the printmaking that you see. and this is a work by Orozco. So this is Orozco's painting that he made for this MoMA show, after the new school and all that. He comes back and paints this, and we'll see it in a moment, so you can see it in color. But now we get to the modern era. In the backyard, in MoMA, you have all these Aztec statues who look like fish out of water, like wondering, what are we doing in Manhattan? It's really awesome, I mean, to see. These are Diego Rivera, that's Diego Rivera. So a really comprehensive view of Mexican kind of history from A to Z. And I just think it's so wild to think of, like, you know, Aztec statues being in Manhattan. It's sort of like having this sculpture of George Washington and, like, you know, what's it, Machu Picchu or something, you know, it's like weird. And really neat though. And here's Frida Kahlo. So it's really, you know, really neat to see all these works, you know, represented in this MoMA show. Here's Diego Rivera, Siqueiros. And here's the piece that Orozco makes, and we'll finish here with this one. You see the blue and the red, which became his kind of colors. What do you think's going on here? Is this a positive view of technology? It says dive bomber and tank.
Just like somebody got
chains and-
eaten over there.
Yeah, someone's getting eaten. It looks like chains, kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a
Chains.
face. There's a face.
Yeah, a face with chains coming out of it.
There's 3 faces.
3 faces. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Kind of almost like the face of Greek tragedy or something, perhaps.
Here's
Um,
here.
And
A
the
big-
one guy's getting a nail in the eye.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of Rosenquist, the American artist, kind of big scale, almost anticipating American mural, at least abstract expressionist, to a degree, because it is somewhat abstract. So I do think there's a lot more here than meets the eye. But a very negative view of technology, right? Kind of like he's saying, technology is going to destroy us all.
Well,
And-
if it's meant to be a tank,
yeah, a tank with like maybe
the
a.
chains and the faces are like people getting run over by the truck.
Yeah, and I think what's going on here, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, I think what's going on here is it might be channeling a little bit of Guernica from 1937
Yeah,
and kind of finding, I think there's more there than I think I realized at first. It definitely like the
That-
faces.
That was interesting. It looks like they're chaining his mouth.
yeah.
Or they spike his eyes in the first one, so
Yeah.
then his mouth and then his ears are
Oh yeah,
chained
that's a
over
great
here.
observation.
Oh,
The
so it's
mouth,
like-
so like see no evil, hear no evil,
Yeah.
and
See no evil.
Yeah, brilliant, very good,
Oh,
Bruce. You should be an art historian.
It's definitely
Weird
eyes, mouth,
tendril coming out.
eyes, mouth, and ears.
And remember, this is all like, we're gonna stand up against Hitler, we're gonna put it, you know, all work together. So it's a beautiful moment, which will completely be, you know, destroyed after after World War II, because after that, it's like, now we hate each other, you know, cold, you know, red versus blue, or, you know, red versus capitalism. And so, and we'll go into that when we look at Siqueiros, who's younger than the other two artists, and he's a bridge. So he's, after Siqueiros has his mural destroyed in LA, he's like, oh, I need to do one, let me do another one, I want to make up for that one. So he's like, please, for the US government to give him a visa. And they're like, no, World War II's over, we don't need you guys anymore, bye-bye. And so he doesn't it doesn't come back to the United States. So Siqueiros kind of does some work in Cuba and does a lot more work in Mexico, but his influence will definitely be in the Chicano arts movement out west. Siqueiros, and we'll see him in 2 weeks. But so Orozco, this is his kind of final work in the United States, and we'll go on back to Mexico and make a lot more amazing work like this and other things. And I just, I think his work's really neat. I'll just show you a few more of his things, like perspective, the fire, a flaming figure there. And I think the biggest thing to realize is Orozco has a big influence on Jackson Pollock. This style here, this painterly, brushy style, will be one of the two major forces of inspiration on Jackson Pollock. And Jackson Pollock, by the way, do you know who his mentor was? Benton, the guy who was painting in the next room. So it's really a small world. That's why I think it's so interesting to look at the history of U.S. art in the 20th century from the Mexican perspective, because you get a much more interesting view of U.S. art. And then when we get back to looking at Siqueiros and talking about Cuba, we'll look at kind of how Hitler has an influence on art in Europe and, of course, art in the United States afterwards. So remember, we're still kind of on the good neighbor policy with Mexico right up until World War II. And then afterwards, it shifts. Everything shifts away from muralism to abstract art. And next time we meet, we'll talk about Siqueiros. But just keep in mind that even people like Jacob Lawrence, migration north, this is what's going on in the United States. But African Americans moving north from south. The Jackson boarding home here, that's the only place you could stay during segregation here in Tampa. So a lot of African Americans went north to seek jobs during industrialization and to just get away from segregation. And you can almost feel him channeling Orozco's migrating people, migrating away. And almost you can feel the Mexican muralist influence here with celebrating workers, celebrating, people from ground level. people traveling. So, you know, you really can't separate the Mexican muralist movement from a lot of the art in the 1930s. It's just that changes after World War II, after defeating Hitler. Now, Hitler had his own thing with art, like making fun of the Jews, using art to really say, we're
They
good,
only
they're
let him
bad.
into art school.
What's that? And he got
They
rejected from art
only
school.
let him into art school.
Yeah, that's the John Cusack movie, which everyone should watch, about Hitler, the young artist Hitler. But anyway, so next time we meet, we'll talk about Siqueiros, who's the last of the Mexican muralists, and then we'll be shifting to Cuba and talking about Cuba and religion in Cuba and how Christianity and etc. fares in Cuba. And yeah, on that note, thank you for being here. I'll see you guys next time.
Thanks.
Remember.